This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
What's up, everybody? It is October 27th. It's Thursday. Ryan Jesperson, John Hicks here with you. We've got if you follow us on Twitter, our official account at Real Talk RJ, you already know this. We tweeted it a few minutes ago. It's an Alberta Politics Spectacular today on the show, and we're looking forward to it because, you know, every once in a while we'll bounce around in our coverage. We're a proud prairie-based podcast. As you know, we're an Alberta-based show, and the majority of our audience, I mean, you know, you guys join us from all over the place. We were looking at the website the other day. I love checking out this stuff, and we look at the world map, and we see that we had some downloads from like the UAE. We had some downloads from Singapore, downloads from Australia, and we go, oh, right on. Very cool. Every once in a while, we'll get an email. Raelisa Teagan is a real talker that's been on the show before. She just sent us another message, John. I think she's in Damascus where she sent the message, but she's living in Syria right now, and so we know people from all over the place. But we've got people, you know, obviously a lot of you that join us, in particular from Western Canada. So we want to cover stories of national significance. Yesterday, we spent some time talking about the election in Ontario. Obviously, Stephen Punwasi joining us this week was very cool. A great perspective on property taxes versus income taxes. Are you still thinking about that? Are you still weighing the pros and cons of his tax shuffle?
Oh, yeah. I dreamt about it.
Yeah. We had a whole bunch of people writing in about it. You know, it's the type of thing that people go, yeah, this is really fun to talk about and debate, but you know it's never actually going to happen because no politician that's looking to hold or achieve elected office is ever going to put their neck on the line and campaign on cranking up property taxes. But great conversations there. But we feel like there's so much going on in Alberta right now that it demands and it deserves an entire show. And so that's what we're going to do today. Professor Lisa Young joining us from the University of Calgary in just a couple of minutes. And then I'm also really looking forward to checking in with a former colleague of mine. Tom Vernon and I worked a lot of years together. He, a longtime and accomplished and very skilled storyteller, a television journalist. He was with Global News for a lot of years and just announced his, and I say this with a smirk, his retirement from Global News. He's still a young fella with a great career ahead of him, but he's moving into the private sector, so to speak. He's now going to be a consultant. He's going to help people and organizations and groups, and we'll let Tom tell us about this, but he's going to help people understand how to interact with and impact government. I wonder if he would call himself a lobbyist. We'll find out if Tom Vernon, he's not specifically, I don't think, doing lobbying work, but here's what we'll do. We'll do the journalist's approach to this. We'll ask him if he's going to have to register as a lobbyist, and we'll see what he says. In all seriousness, I love talking to Tom, his understanding of how government works and how the people perceive what government's doing is going to be well worth your time. Tom Vernon's coming up in the second half of this show. So if you have something to say, if you happen to be joining us live on the Mixler streaming audio app, or if you're checking this out live, watching us on YouTube, have your say in the live chat. We'll obviously look for your takes on some of the things that our two guests, these political experts, will be bringing to the table today. And of course, you can send us an email anytime to talk@ryanjesperson.com. That is exactly what Coralie did. And I loved this one, and I thought that this would work as a mention for our great friends at Kubi Energy today, because, you know, the first show of every week, Kubi presents Positive Reflections, right? And we had a special edition of it this week. If you missed it, go back to Monday's show and check it out. From New Murnum School, Mr. Tomafichuk, they call him Mr. T, and his principal there joined us for a live interview, a special edition of Positive Reflections on the heels of his win of a Prime Minister's Award for teaching excellence in STEM, in science and tech, engineering, and math, right? And so Coralie caught that show, and she sent us an email. She says, I just listened to your interview with Mr. T and Ms. Morrison, the principal at New Murnum School, and I knew that I had to write into Real Talk. Coralie says, you have no idea how extraordinary this school is. Talking about New Murnum School. You can Google it if you like. She says, we switched our son there 3 years ago because our hometown school just couldn't provide what he needed, and he was coming home daily in tears. You know, he felt like he was stupid, he would say, and he would tell us he wanted to quit school. And we had heard about this New Murnum School. We decided to give it a try, even though it meant 2 hours of driving every single day. It says, today my son is in grade 9. Coralie says he is a completely different person. He's happy. He's excited to go to school. His favorite teacher by far is Mr. T. He works with the kids' strengths and interests to make them want to be there. You got an idea, you think it's bonkers, Mr. T will give it a try. Your quad, your dirt bike, broken? Bring it in. Fix it for shop credits. This school is out of the box thinking. Their willingness to work with kids and parents to make a school a place their kids want to be is amazing. And Coralie says, I will forever be grateful for all they've done for my son. There just aren't enough words. How's that for an email? That is like a passionate parent writing in to extol the virtues of their school. These are teachers and administrators that are going above and beyond the call of duty, and we were thrilled to hear that. So, Coralie, thanks for taking the time. It's never lost on us. We've got this community, right, that joins us on the show, and we want to hear your stories. When we talk about great teachers, impactful teachers, is there one through the course of your schooling, like K through all the way up, that jumps out at you immediately? You're like, that was the one?
No, not really.
Honestly, not one?
No, not really. What do you want? What, like
I
a
feel
favorite
sad
teacher?
For you. There wasn't a teacher that you're like, that one took an interest in my life.
No,
or
but
that
I had a bunch that I liked, but no one like. I didn't have a favorite teacher. I didn't have a number one. Did you?
Got it. Yeah, well, I had a few, but I think of teachers that when I look back now, teachers that gave me the benefit of I always had enthusiasm. I was never a jerk in class, but I was a class clown for sure, and I was maybe a little bit difficult to manage for sure. I've told the audience before that my parents did me this amazing gift of keeping all my report cards, and they like presented them to me when I was an adult, and it's actually super cool to go back and read what like Donna McCurdy was saying about me in kindergarten, Miss McCurdy, my amazing kindergarten teacher, or like Miss Shifley coming up, or Mr. Robertson. I think of Bruce Robertson, my grade 8 social studies teacher. Maybe he'll hear this. I don't know. But like he was a musician. He was a dad. He was like an involved teacher. Like he gave a rip about his students and his kids.
Yeah.
He would kind of knew how to crack the whip with me in a way that it would resonate.
Yeah.
Like it's sort of like the parenting style. That was his teaching style of like, I'm not angry with you. I'm disappointed in you. And you would way rather anger someone than disappoint them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think of
Have I disappointed you by not having a favorite teacher?
No, like
I actually, you want to know who my favorite like piece of the faculty was actually my guidance counselor, Mrs. Robin.
Well, there you go.
Yes, because she kind of put me on the right path, which is her job. But she would always be like, well, same thing. I was a little loud, little outlandish in class. She's like, take more drama. And I was like, well, I like art, but I also like computers. So she was like pushing me towards graphic design and stuff like that, which I eventually went and took some courses when I got out of high school. So I think that would be my number one, was the guidance counselor, Mrs. Robin. But, I'm putting the camera on you to see what.
It's okay. I got my headphone cable tangled up in my rolling chair, and it means that I'm pinned to the ground. I can't move right now, so it's okay. I'll figure it out. With the audience that's watching on YouTube will know as soon as you put Dr. Young full screen, I'm doing damage control trying to fix my headphone jack. But that's a problem that I sustained. You know what, though, man? Guidance counselors, think of that, and I can't wait to ask Lisa when she joins us here. Like,
well, not a lot of people bring them up when you ask a question.
But
like
I bet a lot of people.
Right?
Yeah, but imagine. For a lot of kids that are feeling either hopeless or unmotivated or discouraged or stressed, like whatever, you can experience a million different feelings at that age, especially when probably a lot of adults are going like, oh, you're in grade 11, grade 12. What do you want to do? What's your plan? What are you going to do? And
a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, but for a guidance counselor to see into that kid and understand what makes them tick and what's it going to do for them. I bet you the messaging is so different now than it was 10 or 15 or 30 or 40 years ago. Right? I mean, we get messages from people all the time in the trades. You think of some of the most successful entrepreneurs. You think of some of the people that have driven the economy. You think of some of the stereotypes that have happened with the sort of like the blue collar versus the white collar. And if university doesn't work out for you, you can always go to the trades. Kind of like it was always kind of seen like, oh, I didn't get into university, I'm going to go to polytechnic school. Now, that's not how anybody thinks. Right? Nobody thinks that way anymore. It's just not the way it is.
You should probably go there first. You should go to the trades first. That's where the money is, right?
100%. A ton of opportunity. I mean, I don't think you try to talk anybody
less competition
into or out of the trades or university or going straight into the workforce or whatever. It's what's right for you. What brings you joy? What motivates you? Where do you see yourself making a contribution? Sort of idea. Anyway, I'm not the expert. Don't take career advice from me, but. I think about this kind of stuff. And John, when I am thinking about, reinventing myself, you know where I go? I go to athabascau.ca because they're Canada's open university with world-class accredited online programs and courses offering the flexibility to learn at your own pace on a schedule that suits your lifestyle. Who cares where the guy you know is going to school? Who cares what your parents did? Do what's right for you. Check out athabascau.ca. Oh, and hey, by the way, if you're mom or dad, who cares what your kid's doing? Why not kickstart your post-secondary experience? Athabasca's got such a diverse student population because so many people have found a fit with that flexible schedule. athabascau.ca is where you can learn more about the admissions process. Covenant Foundation Lottery cutoff is coming up November 3rd. You've got, seriously, less than a week. You've got less than a week to qualify to win that stunning dream home, $2.2 million. But that's not it. A 50-50 where somebody's going to take more than $500,000. An Alfa Romeo, a BMW, a Lexus, luxury vacations to Scotland, New York, Turk and Caicos, PEI. John, ever been to PEI?
Prince Edward Island?
Yeah, no, the other PEI. I would love to go, and someone's going to when they win that trip at covenantfoundationlottery.ca. People aren't going to believe we don't rehearse these fantastic back and forths. Get your tickets at 1-888-944-2774 or check out covenantfoundationlottery.ca today.
Been to Newfoundland, not PEI.
You have a good time in Newfoundland?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
East Coast is incredible.
What am I even doing? I need to get out to the Maritimes.
Yeah.
100%. Probably the most underrated, well, whatever. Everyone in Canada feels like their area is most underrated, don't we? And finally, before we get to Professor Young, I wanted to mention this really quickly. Our friends at Park Power, I want to direct you to their social media accounts, in particular their Twitter account. Look for Park Power on Twitter because they're retweeting research from Blake Schaefer out of the University of Calgary that's providing great insights into whether or not you want to be on the fixed rate or the variable rate for your electricity and natural gas heading into the winter. You want to straight up save money? Follow Park Power on social media. They're on Instagram as well, and visit them online at parkpower.ca. 2022-Real Talk is the promo code that's going to knock $70 off your first bill from Park Power. Dr. Leela Young is a professor of political science at the University of Calgary. She writes about Alberta politics on her wildly popular Substack. You can check that out at lisayoung.substack.com. Dr. Young making her return to the show. It's nice to see your face again. Thanks for making time for us.
Happy to be here.
Oh, we always like to, when someone's background immediately makes an impression on us. I know that the audience watching on YouTube is going to be curious, and so am I. What can you tell? You've got some stunning, it looks like almost stormscapes behind you.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to be really embarrassed because I can't remember the last name of the artist, but I follow him on Twitter. That's where I found him, and it's at Jay is Painting.
Okay, wonderful.
He's based in Edmonton and does beautiful work.
Yeah, Jay Bigham is who you're talking about.
There we go. You've got some of his stuff too, right?
I used to, and you know what? I saw Jay. His work stopped me in my tracks. It was at, this is a local reference, but for our Edmonton audience, the Strathern Art Walk. I'm not sure if you've been there, but it's right on Strathern Drive. It overlooks, it's just south of the river, overlooking downtown. And I would guess they've got, off the top of my head, I'm going to say 150 artists there, something like that, intense. And they've got a beer garden and food trucks, and just amazing. And his paintings just stopped me in my tracks when I saw them. So, Dr. Young, growing up in school, whatever, here comes the question. Did you have, when we talk about favorite teachers or teachers that really made an impact or helped you sort of shape the course of your career, so to speak, was there one that jumps out?
Well, I'm going to give you two answers. So in high school, I was a band nerd. And so Mr. Laycock, the band teacher, made the band room home for the band nerds. And so that gave me, a place to be in high school. And, even now, decades later, I still play once a week in Foothills Concert Band here in Calgary. I'm still doing it, right?
Wow.
So that's answer one.
What instrument do you play?
I play the trumpet.
Nice.
Yeah. But the second answer, and this is going to be really hokey, but I went to a high school where my mom was an English teacher. And you would think that would be a complete nightmare, right? But and I never had her as a teacher, but she was the coach of the debating team. So I'm really outing myself as a nerd now, because band nerd and debate team. And I would say, of the things that I learned in high school that have stuck with me, that are helping me to this day, probably debate. So it would be Mrs. Young, my mom.
That is so great. First of all, I think that every kid needs to be in band and debate, right? I mean, with our little guy, Wyatt. We're fostering this love of music, and I'm just trying to say to him, and we don't really need to say anything because he's catching that bug. But like, there's so many reasons why understanding music as a young person can help you growing up, and then the ability, like, to debate, to form and shape ideas. I even like the idea, and sometimes maybe talk hosts get put in this position of being assigned a position to take, right? And then argue it.
And, we talk a lot about how people get caught now in their social media bubbles, right? And you only read things from people who you agree with. And I think we lose something that way, because you've got to be able to make the argument against your side, right? You need to understand what other people are thinking and see if maybe they have a point, right? It can shape your ideas and maybe move you a little out of your bubble sometimes.
Oh, man, I'm going to give myself a concussion. I'm nodding so strongly with what you're saying. I believe that to be true. And I think that we've just found our segue to dive into talk about Alberta politics, haven't we? Congratulations, by the way, on your Substack. I mean, every time you put something out there, everybody's buzzing about it. That's got to be exciting. That's, relatively speaking, kind of a new thing these days.
It's kind of a new thing. I'm currently on research leave, so I'm not teaching. I've got a little extra time, and Alberta politics is just so interesting. So I started this kind of on a whim, and I got to say, I'm having so much fun with it.
Well,
right?
It's great. You're doing a great job. Yeah. People can check out lisayoung.substack.com. Let's jump into it. The one that prompted, I mean, obviously you're always welcome on the show, and we love talking to you, but you were all over our radar yesterday with your amusing and insightful post, Bowling with Danielle. And you opened by saying, when my kids were little, I used to love taking them to the bowling alley because it was totally legit to ask for the bumpers on our lane. Lisa, can you take us into this column?
Okay. So, I'm not a great bowler, right? And I'm not going to get any better. But my connection there was to Danielle Smith, who right now I think probably isn't that great at governing. Now she's got room to grow, right? She's new to this. She's never been in cabinet, and now all of a sudden she's premier. And we can see her making some beginner stumbles along the way, right? And she's also gone out of her way to say that she's going to do these grand things. She's going to pass a sovereignty act that's going to be, exempt Alberta from federal laws, which we know is unconstitutional. She is going to, fire all the deputy ministers that were appointed under the Notley government, these sorts of things. But then what she's actually doing is much more moderate. So I've been trying to figure out what's going on here. And what I've come up with is the idea that right now, she's bowling. She's maybe not that good at it yet, but the bumpers are up. They're keeping her from really having any disasters. So what are the bumpers? The first bumper is the professional, apolitical, not political public service, right? The deputy ministers and the other public servants whose job it is to help her deliver on her platform, but keep her inside the law and the norms of politics. So that's the bumper on one side.
Can I jump in quickly to point out that just to make one point, because I want to clarify, in many circumstances these will be senior public servants that have worked under different governments, including previous manifestations of the Conservative government and potentially Rachel Notley's NDP, right? These are people that don't come in and come out when government changes.
Exactly. So maybe it's helpful for the listeners to know you've got the cabinet minister who's appointed, and they'll normally have a chief of staff who is a political person, right? Who's supposed to be their right hand, who helps them move forward on the mandate that the premier has given them, right? So there is the political side of the house, but there's also a deputy minister, and that's someone who's normally come up through the public service. They've worked in, different jobs. They stay. They might be shuffled from the Ministry of Health to the Ministry of Finance and so on to get more experience. But these are the folks that keep government running. They're the ones who provide continuity, and they normally last from government to government. And it's a really important part of our system of government, in Canada, in the UK, where we took it from, right? And I think, and it's part of their job to offer what's called fearless advice to politicians, right? To say, minister or premier, you want to do this, but we want you to be aware of some of the consequences of that, right? It may not be constitutional. It might be hard to implement. Here's a different way you could think about achieving the same objective, right? That's fundamentally their job.
What's the other bumper?
Well, the other bumper is interesting because we don't normally think of it as being a bumper, and that is the UCP caucus. And typically, we talk a lot about how powerful the prime minister or the premier is in our political system. They can expect the loyalty of their cabinet and their caucus. It's pretty rare to have a revolt of your caucus or your cabinet in Canada. But I think this is a particular set of circumstances here for Danielle Smith. Remember that she won on the 6th ballot. She got, 53% of the vote of members. And she didn't have very many people from the caucus that were supporting her. So caucus is not necessarily a friendly crowd for her. And, here we can draw a comparison to Liz Truss in the UK, who also got elected by members without a lot of support in the Conservative caucus. And she got in trouble really fast, right?
Like really fast.
Really, really fast. Yeah. Like a head of lettuce. Fast. So Smith, I think, has to be aware of that. And so we've seen the caucus reining her in. And, the very first time the caucus met with her, at the end of that caucus meeting, all of a sudden she's talking about how she has no intention of the Sovereignty Act actually overturning a Supreme Court ruling or being outside the rule of law, which is a real change in tune for her.
Huge.
So clearly something is happening there, and caucus and maybe cabinet down the road is going to rein her in a little bit, at least for a while.
There's is there an example? I mean, I hesitate to make this compare. I don't want to compare this too closely because Alison Redford had her incidents in office that I think shaped a lot of the public opinion that hurt her, and then of course that caucus revolt as well that led to her resignation. But is that sort of maybe a warning case study a little bit closer to home in Alberta of how quickly a premier can lose support? Redford was relatively new to the party as well, relatively speaking, when she became premier.
Yeah. I think, Redford's another interesting example because she was elected as party leader, again, without a lot of support from the caucus. And she was seen ideologically as being out of line with where the caucus was. Yeah. She was more to the center than the caucus was, whereas Danielle Smith, I think, is probably further to the right or a version of the right than much of the caucus is. So there's similarities there. Now, what's interesting is that Redford didn't get in trouble necessarily because of her policy stances, but because she was aloof. She never really engaged with caucus. She didn't bring them on side, I think, in some respects. And then she got in trouble with some out-of-touch spending with government funds as well, use of the government plane and so on. It was really out of touch with the sort of populist ethos of Alberta politics. So it's a little bit different, but it does show us that caucus under some circumstances really can be a constraint.
Leela Aheer announcing yesterday that she will not seek re-election. Most recently, she was a candidate for the leadership of the party. Of course, she served as a minister before under Jason Kenney until she lost her post when she was critical of Alberta's former premier. She's faced a bit of a coup within her own riding association. Leela is a very likable politician, longtime politician in Alberta with both the Wild Rose Party, the Conservative Party, the current manifestation, and now we'll see what she moves to do next. Some are suggesting that maybe this wasn't a huge surprise based on the rumblings and what had been happening in Strathmore area and Chestermere as well. But what do you read into this announcement from Leela here? She wasn't named to cabinet under Danielle Smith. I think off the top of my head, she was probably one of the only leadership candidate, right? Taves is in, Schultz
The
is
only
in,
one,
like
yeah.
the only one. Sani's in,
Yeah.
Lowen's
Yeah.
in, right?
Yeah. Everyone else is in.
Everyone else.
Yeah. And so there's that. And I think she was facing a very difficult nomination contest in her riding. So I think she's decided simply to walk away from that fight, that she's not going to win it. She did leave the door open, though, not to running for the UCP, but, she said she wouldn't run again for the UCP. So there's some speculation. Would she run for as an independent? Would she run for the NDP? I mean, she certainly was seen as being a little out of line ideologically with the rest of the party. She talked a lot about the need for compassion and inclusion. She was a real critic of Kenney and the Kenney government on that front.
Yeah. I've seen some people do a real turnaround in how they perceive Leela here. I think that there were some associations with former Wild Rosers, and maybe this might hurt some of my more conservative friends to hear this, but people just sort of perceived them as sort of like the cold, hard right. And Leela showed a different side of her over the past couple of years. And ultimately, in a weird way, like you just identified, I think tragically, politically, it hurt her.
Inside the UCP, absolutely.
Yeah.
She criticized Kenney while she was in cabinet and was thrown out of cabinet. And then, I think there was a fair bit of party support, I hear, for the person who is running, to be the candidate in her electoral district.
Yeah.
So, there wasn't a lot of there was a lot of tolerance in the Kenney government for criticism from further right, but there wasn't tolerance of criticism from more moderate folks.
Yeah. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith has been criticized by some. I mean, she's just obviously named her cabinet, and to say there's not exactly gender parity might be an understatement. The representation there has been the focus of some who argue that with fewer than 1 in 5 cabinet ministers women, that there's some work to do here. The Premier was asked about it, and here's what Danielle Smith had to say about it this week. We'll just tee that up again, and we'll get it. Basically, she goes on the record.
As for status of women, I'm a woman. I've got 4 senior cabinet ministers who are women. If people think that there's any danger that women are not going to be represented, then I would ask that they just look at the composition that we have.
You look at the composition we have, she says. What's your response?
Well, I think this notion that in an era when we increasingly see gender equal cabinets, right? And I'm not suggesting that this was likely to be seen in Alberta, particularly given the UCP's, the number of women that they've got in their caucus, to reduce the number of women when you've got a female premier, really, I think sends a message that, she thinks she got there on her own initiative and women don't need any kind of a hand up. And, who's important? Well, rural men. That's who got into her cabinet. That's who, there's a lot of continuity there, but the new faces are for the most part rural men. And I guess that's who she's trying to appeal to. I suspect that this is a real political error, though. She needs to make a breakthrough of support into suburban Calgary, at least. And women are quite skeptical of the UCP. I think we've seen that in polling over the last few years. I think Smith has a chance to connect with them, but she sure sends a message in saying that, no, the people who I've brought into my cabinet are almost entirely men.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? We've had this conversation. We had the strategists on a couple of Friday roundtables ago, and they were getting into this a little bit about the early notes. It was in particular that reporting from Rick Bell, that column where he sat down with Danielle Smith, who had appeared to sort of like spill her guts to Rick about what their plan, their sort of the whole premise of their entire campaign, and like who they were. It was like she showed him the playbook, kind of. And so he lays it out like they don't need Edmonton, or that they've basically written off Edmonton. It'll be interesting to see Deputy Premier Casey Madhu. Interesting appointment there, by the way. The one Edmonton riding that they've got currently. And there's a strong NDP candidate, Nathan Ip, off the top of my head, I think it is, that's coming at that seat. But Danielle Smith essentially said to Rick Bell, my words, not hers, that if we can sweep the rural areas, we don't need to win Calgary. Like, we need to win like 5 seats in Calgary. And you wonder, senior cabinet, I think of like someone like Tyler Shandro or, Rick McIver out of cabinet. Isn't that interesting? But there's a lot of prominent conservatives down in Calgary that you have to assume would be going, we're not sure that this is the most astute approach to winning government in May of 2023.
Absolutely. And, it's one thing for strategists to be, say that this is the plan. For the premier to say this, that it's okay to govern with representation only from rural areas and a little bit of Calgary, really leaves you wondering, who is she governing for? What's her intention? Is the intention here to have a rural government for this very urban, very diverse province?
Let me ask you this, Professor Lisa Young, our guest, if you're just tuning in on the Mixlr live streaming audio app. Premier Smith criticized for attending an event in Brooks Medicine Hat. Of course, that's where she's going to be running in this by-election against Barry Morishita, of note, the former Brooks mayor and former president of the Alberta municipalities, now, of course, the leader of the Alberta Party. That's an interesting race to watch, plus an NDP candidate, and we hope to speak with all 3 of them through this by-election. Here's the point. She attended a grand opening event for the Medicine Hat College's new co-op wellness commons, and critics of hers are saying that this violates the Elections Act, and if it doesn't technically violate the Elections Act, they're saying it violates the spirit of the act. That was MLA David Egan that said that just a couple of days ago. And then, of course, there's the background. When you remember Gordon Dirks was running for the Conservatives down in Calgary, and he authorized some modular classrooms in Calgary Elbow, the riding where he was a by-election candidate, and Danielle Smith was quite critical of that many moons ago. Was this the wrong move for her? She says, I was just attending as Alberta's premier. I wasn't campaigning.
Yeah, I think... I wouldn't say necessarily that it violates the Elections Act. I haven't looked at it carefully enough to really have an opinion about that. But I do think that the appearance certainly is that, she's using her role as premier, but also as a candidate in this by-election to take credit for government spending, right? To stand there and remind folks in Medicine Hat about government investments. So I think it would have been more prudent not to have attended that, to have asked, maybe for this to be postponed until after the by-election. And, I think on this and on a number of other things, she's going to face some issues because during her time as leader of the Wild Rose Party, she was very critical on a number of fronts, as you would expect an opposition leader to be. And she has to remember now to be consistent with those statements that she made.
Yeah, no kidding. Hey, let me ask you real quick, at least. A lot of people are going, hang on a second. What's this all about?
So, I've got my personal theory about this, and it's just a theory, but I suspect that she spent a little bit of time with one or more of the Flames owners who complained about the outcome of the last Calgary municipal election, right? Because she then went and talked to Rick Bell about how we need political parties in municipal politics.
Yeah.
And they probably said as well, and it's so frustrating. We can't get a deal going with the city on putting this back together. And so, Smith went back to the office and, told her staff, I suspect, write a letter, tell the city council they've got to do this, right? This is being interpreted as, a plan to win Calgary support, which I think it might well be, but also that it signals an intention to invest money in this. And I'm not sure that's the case. I'm not sure this is carefully enough thought through. And again, there are comments from Danielle Smith, Wild Rose leader, about the Edmonton arena saying that, public money shouldn't be used for this. So she's going to face that kind of a criticism. So this may be nothing other than the premier trying to push city council into something and giving Rick McIver a bit of a job to, go and talk to his former colleagues on city council and get him moving in the right direction, in her view.
Yeah, McIver, a former mayoral candidate, of course, and when they used to call him alderman, a former alderman, right? Yeah, way back in the day. Yeah, I've got many thoughts on that. Murray Edwards, the owner of the Flames, obviously closely tied to Alberta Enterprise Group, where Danielle Smith was president after she left radio. Which is an interesting angle on this. Of course, there's the fiscal conservative angle, which would sort of decimate any appetite you might think for public investment in this arena. I would point, to not take us too far into the weeds, that the Edmonton Arena deal wound up looking phenomenal. For the city of Edmonton, it worked out well. But I digress. I do admit and acknowledge that Calgary does need a new arena. Like with regards to the state of major cities, including in Canada, of 1 million people, Calgary's arena just doesn't stack up. But then again, I also think it's nuts, Lisa, that we knock down buildings after 35, 40 years, just calling them garbage. And they cost, a couple hundred back in the day, or now $600 million to build. It's pretty wild how we work as a society, isn't it?
It is.
Thanks so much for joining us. Keep up the amazing work. I want everybody right now to go check out your Substack. You're doing such a great job. What Now? An Alberta Politics Newsletter, and you can find it at lisayoung.substack.com. Doctor, thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
You got it. That's Professor Leela Aheer out of the University of Calgary. In just a second, Tom Vernon. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I believe that this is Tom's first interview since he left Global News, which is great. We appreciate his availability, but wanted to give you a heads up, the Real Talkers, that coming up on Friday, it's going to be our Real Talk Roundtable presented by Urban Timber. Now, every day we're sitting around this table, at least I am right now, that was put together. We had this idea, and then we handed this idea over to our friends at Urban Timber. And to say that they delivered would be an understatement. You can see our table if you watch the show on YouTube. And I'm going to be posting it on social media as well. I'm so proud of how this thing turned out. They did such a beautiful job. It's white oak with epoxy filled in to allow the light to shine through the table. It is stunning. And then underneath, these hand-cranked gears to raise and lower the table. That was our vision. They delivered. They can do the same for you. Go to urbantimber.ca today to check out their brand new showroom. Absolutely stunning. They're booking from now until the end of the month for guaranteed delivery by Christmas. You want your family Christmas dinner to be around a brand new, breathtaking table? Today's a great time to visit the new showroom at Urban Timber. They're open from 10 to 4 on the weekends. You can go see them online as well at urbantimber.ca. At Local Environmental Services, if you're in Alberta and Saskatchewan, they want you to know that you deserve better when it comes to waste and recycling management, when it comes to dealing with the corporate partner that's handling this important detail. Communities deserve better, they say. Service, prices, support for local causes, whether it's more permanent or temporary bins you're looking for, residential or commercial, industrial services, they do it all. Water hauling, fencing, vacuum truck services, and of course they present Trash Talk every Friday here on Real Talk. You can get your quote today from Mikkel, Chris, Lauren, and the team at localenvironmental.ca. And a shout out as well to our friends at Eden Landscaping. LandscapeEdmonton.ca is where you go to check out their portfolio. For more than 20 years, Mike and his team, still family owned by the way, have been bringing outdoor spaces to life. It takes planning, it takes thought and consideration. They don't put shovels in the ground until you are thrilled with the design. That's why winter is a great time to get in touch with them and start talking ideas. Let their design team start working. Let them order the permits. Let them order the construction materials. So when the ground thaws in April, Eden Landscaping's set to go. Their website again, landscapeedmonton.ca. For the last 20 years, Tom Vernon has been working in radio and TV, including the last 9, almost a full decade, covering the Alberta legislature for Global News. We were colleagues for 6 of those years, and it was always been a pleasure to chat with him. Tom is now a strategic communications consultant with Crestview Strategy, a full-service public affairs agency. And I believe, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this is your first interview since you left Global News. Are we correct on that?
That's correct.
This
Yeah,
is a
thanks
big
for asking.
deal. This is a big deal because you and I would talk back in the day. You're the reputable, objective reporter, sticking just to the facts, bringing your brand of journalism to the people. And I was charged with putting a burr under people's saddles and lighting their ideas on fire. And you would always make yourself available for the talk show, but you would say, remember, you can't ask me opinion questions. But I think I'm allowed to now, right?
You're going to find I am who I am, Ryan. I've been doing it for 20 years. I'm not just going to flip a switch. You want to ask me a lot about Star Wars and Star Trek, I have a lot of opinions on that. But yes, I can absolutely. We'll delve into politics as well.
Yeah. Hey, I was kind of joking about this earlier in the show, but actually I am serious about it. Do you have to register as a lobbyist now? Are you officially a lobbyist?
No, I'm not on the lobby side. I'm on the strategic communications side. So I'm working on communications plans and speaking with clients on how to best get their stories out into the public.
Amazing. Well, you've had a great understanding of how to do that for 20 years. So what a coup for Crestview. So congratulations to them there. You think you can have a tough time stepping out of the journalism side? This is something that I know a guy like you, like when we would work election nights, it was like you were just almost vibrating. Like you love that stuff.
It was great to have the UCP leadership in my last couple of weeks and for it to go long and for us to have to fill 2-3 hours, I can't remember what it was, of television, just to stand there and talk about what's going on because, those are the most fun nights. You remember those, right? Where you're live all night, you're speaking about what's happening, you don't know what's going to happen, and just fill the time. So I will miss that, but get to stretch my legs other ways, speaking with people about their stories, and I'll still get to do some writing and hopefully get to do more stuff like this to scratch that itch as well.
Yeah, cool. Well, you're on our short list for political panelists now, which is awesome to have you here, Tom. We haven't been able to speak for the last couple of years on air, so it's nice to be able to connect again. Let me ask you, generally speaking, before we get into some of the specific stories that are making news, today is an Alberta Politics themed edition of Real Talk. Danielle Smith gave us her first interview here before swearing in as Premier. That was not too long ago, less than a month ago, just a few weeks. And I'm curious to know for your initial impressions on the stamp that she's putting on this party, what the early tenure looks like with Danielle Smith as Premier, and maybe some of the key storylines that you're keeping an eye on. The campaigning has begun already, though the writ has not yet dropped for next May.
Yeah, and it's so I was at her first speech after being elected, and that was at the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. She was giving a business audience a view of how she plans to move forward on things. And what was really interesting is this was after the comments about Ukraine had come forward. This was after the comments about the vaccinations. And the president of the Edmonton Chamber asked her, so how are things going? How's the first week? And she goes, bumpy. So she has that sense of humor, right? She's always been that strong communicator, former radio host, right? That they're able to communicate on that. And then she came forward with her cabinet. And look, her entire campaign was speaking about change. And we're going to change how we deal with Ottawa. We're going to change how Alberta Health Services manages things. And so we were expecting a huge swath of change in cabinet. And I found it really interesting where there were a lot of familiar faces in a lot of familiar places. So while she's talking about big change on the policy front, really we're seeing a lot of stability, a lot of continuity when it comes to people around her table. Obviously some new people in some big portfolios and a shuffle in that. But I found that really interesting in the, I want to say, stability on the cabinet front on that side. Mm-hmm.
I was just talking to Professor Leela Young from the University of Calgary, who you know well, about the letter from Premier Smith, essentially to Calgary's mayor, right, to Calgary's council, and they want to see a deal get done to build an arena. And if you actually read the letter, and it's 2 pages, I'm not going to read it all right now. People can easily find it online. It nowhere does it make any promise of any funding from the province. It would obviously be extremely premature for that. If were there to be funding from the province, I think probably the capital city might be collectively outraged. But take us into your thoughts on this. Were you surprised to see the letter? It's no surprise. It's one of the most obvious realities in the National Hockey League that the Calgary Flames need a new arena. There's been a lot of talk about it, and the arena deal died shortly after this council turned over last municipal election. But what do you make of the letter from Premier Smith?
So, I mean, I was surprised when I saw it come forward because we hadn't seen any talk from the provincial government, from Danielle Smith on this up until this point. But look, what's the battleground? I mean, Leela Young talked about a hard act to follow, but she said it right when Premier Smith spoke to Rick Bell and talked about, getting strong representation in rural Alberta and then getting some seats in Calgary. But we know Calgary is going to be the battleground in the next provincial election. I mean, that was the legislature reporting out of Edmonton from the legislature, and it seemed about 95% of the media veils from the NDP and as well as from the government were taking place in Calgary. So we all know where the battleground is going to be in the spring of 2023. So look, we don't know if there's going to be any money going towards the arena project or anything like that. It's too soon to say. But to put on a Rick McIver, who an interesting exclusion from cabinet, but still a very high-profile cabinet minister, former cabinet minister, MLA, and Calgarian, to put him on that file shows, look, a commitment from the UCP that they are going to be involved in these conversations and involved in Calgary politics, involved in getting votes inside Calgary, because that's the main battleground. So it didn't surprise me that there was a big Calgary announcement this early on. Arena, that's going to be an interesting look. We went through it here in Edmonton, right? We know it's going to be an interesting conversation.
But yeah, and when Edmonton went through it, it's a dramatic way to put it. But it's this is the stuff that hits home, right? Because sports fans, their allegiance to these teams and the threat of losing the team, the threat of the team moving, sort of hits people in this strange way where they might become more emotional or more supportive of, or quite frankly, on the flip side, more inclined to dismiss or fight against something that otherwise would be considered to be another infrastructure project. People don't typically get some people do, but not everybody gets all worked up about, expansions of the freeway or widening the thoroughfares and things like that. Equal amounts of money in a lot of cases. Public transit, maybe people get a little bit more fired up about, but when you start invoking sports franchises and entertainment districts, that's when people really get passionate about it, to state the obvious.
And it's a double-edged sword, right? Like, I don't think there's anybody in Edmonton really unhappy about the new arena. But look, the Kates did not get many fans throughout that whole process. City Council was really getting criticized throughout that process. So, this is a lot of money on the line, and these deals can be tricky, and they don't always win the court of public opinion in the early part and in the construction part, because it's a lot of money being spent. But after everything is in the ground and after everything's done, like you mentioned, while you're talking with Dr. Young about how the deal here in Edmonton has worked out so well for the city. But like I said, it's interesting that she's getting involved in that conversation and trying to appear to be fighting for Calgary and fighting for a